Hello and welcome to the Artists Make Money podcast, where artists share their thoughts and feelings about money, how they make it and what they do with it. I'm your host, Vivienne Egan. I'm an interactive theatre and comedy producer, a podcaster and a freelance business writer, and I love talking about all the different ways that artists build careers and incomes. Today's guest is Comedy Festival Director Geoff Rowe. We talked about how he founded Leicester Comedy Festival and the arts charity Big Difference Company, the value of networking, how humour can be used to connect with people, and the need to adapt to evolving audiences. This episode of Artists Make Money is brought to you by our friends at Side Hustle Sites. They make designer flat pack websites, like the IKEA of websites, with helpful instructions and guides for how to make your website look really great. It is cheaper than Squarespace, and their templates are actually specialised to particular jobs. So they've got templates for theatre professionals and for freelance writers. I'm actually about to use them to build my freelance writing website because I don't have one. Or they can actually design you a website from scratch, which they did for me on the Artists Make Money website. If you sign up via sidehustle-sites.com/AMM, I will link that in the show notes, you will get a fantastic professional looking website and your first month subscription free and the second month half price. That is just for Artists Make Money listeners. On with the show. Hello, Geoff. Thank you so much for being on the Artists Make Money podcast. Would you start, please, by telling the people who you are and how it is that you make your money?
My name's Geoff Rowe. I'm the founding director of two festivals, Leicester Comedy Festival and the UK Kids Comedy Festival. I'm sort of a producer, I think. So how do I earn my money? Well, I'm employed by the charity Big Difference Company that runs those two festivals, and we can talk about how the finances of the charity work in a bit. But I'm employed. I have, as I keep telling my parents who don't believe that I have a proper job, I am employed. I get my monthly payslip.
Yeah, and so did you found that charity?
Yeah, so what happened was, for a long time, Leicester Comedy Festival is about to celebrate its 30th anniversary in just about 18 months' time, so which makes me feel very old. But at some point in that 30 years, the organisation that I set up started to do other things other than the comedy festival. So because we were doing other things, we needed a different name that wasn't so geographically specific, as in Leicester Comedy Festival. So we came up with the name Big Difference, and that's the name of the charity. So I was, along with the directors of the company and then the trustees of the charity, I was involved in setting that up.
And what was the impulse behind making it a charity rather than like a for-profit organization?
I have in sometimes when I say this, I feel like it's kind of making a kind of statement or a bold assertion or something, and it's not meant to be like that at all. But I've never really been motivated by money. There are loads of different models for festivals. There are really commercial models. There are less commercial models, and I was always motivated by putting on what I would define as being a really good festival, and the money side of that never really featured in my head, really. So the idea of, we've always, whether we've liked it or not, we've always been not for profit because we've very rarely made any money out of it. And so the idea of it being a registered charity felt right. There's different models, aren't there? There's like a community interest company, there's a not-for-profit, but we just went for being a registered charity. When we first wanted to be a registered charity, we tried to set up Leicester Comedy Festival as a registered charity, and we were turned down 3 times by the Charities Commission presumably because they didn't think that comedy or a comedy festival could be charitable.
Right.
Even though we've always done community projects and supported new and emerging talent and done all of that. And when we changed the name to Big Difference, they accepted us straight away.
Ah, interesting.
Well, you can draw your own conclusions to that story.
Sure, yeah, for sure. So take us back to the start of Leicester Comedy Festival. So funnily enough, it was my high school drama teacher who knew you at that time who
Yeah.
put us in touch, which I just love via Twitter. And she said that it was actually like part of a project for your university degree. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm not just flattering you, but this is a weird situation for me because you probably weren't born when this happened. But
When what? No, I'm older than 30.
yeah. Oh, you are. Oh,
I
okay.
am.
Well, I am flattering you in that case.
I'm turning 33 on Sunday.
Okay. Well, you were still pretty young. So so a long time ago, in the dark ages of time, I came to Leicester to study arts management at De Montfort University. So just to roll the clock backwards a little bit, I promoted my first gig when I was age 13 because in our local village where I lived, it was really boring and there was nothing to do, and I wanted something for me and my friends to do. So I put on a gig, and so throughout my teenage years, I put on shows. It wasn't a very big thing, but it was fun, and so I wanted to become a promoter, producer, whatever. So I came to Leicester, studied arts management, and then in our final year, we had to put on a practical project, and we made the decision to do it in the summer of '93, and we were all, most of our year were music fans. We loved live music, and I think it's now just a website, but there was a magazine called the New Musical Express, and we got NME every week, and it was our Bible. And NME started to talk about comedy, contemporary comedy, alternative comedy, popular comedy, call it what you will. And in the spring of 1993, they featured Rob Newman and David Baddiel on the front cover of NME, which was unheard of because it was a music magazine. And the idea of putting comedians on the front cover was interesting. So we were all music fans, and so they started to talk about this thing called comedy, and we thought it sounded really exciting. So we decided to put on a comedy festival in Leicester, and so we did it. Yeah, we did it as part of our final year studies. I had to write a report and was marked on it. You know, these things that you do when you're at university, and it was great. I mean, we had about 5,000 people came, and we had about 50 shows, and people like Harry Hill and Matt Lucas and others appeared. Nick Park, who created Wallace and Gromit, came up and did a Q&A, and it was good. It was great. It was good fun, and we all graduated. And in those days, the idea of doing what I do, you probably had to move to London. You might have got away with Brighton or Manchester, but certainly staying in Leicester wasn't really an option. There was very few jobs available. So most of our year group moved away, and myself and two friends from the course, Claire and Abby, stayed in Leicester for a bit, and said, well, that worked really well. We loved doing that thing. The venues really liked it. People came. So should we do it again? So in the second year, 95, we just did it really. And there was no thought about it like having a life. I mean, there was never a plan for it to survive any years, let alone 30. But in that second year, we got a sponsorship deal with what was called Intercity Midland Mainline, and it's now called East Midlands Railways. So the local train company gave us £25,000 to sponsor the second festival, which in those days was a lot. I mean, in these days it's a lot of money,
Still
but
a
in
lot of
those days
money, yeah.
it was a lot. And that was a real kind of, oh, okay, right. Well, anyway, so I'm probably going too far into the future now because you might want to ask me some more questions. But that's how it started, and it was fun. It was exciting. You asked me at the beginning, how do I earn my money? I certainly didn't earn my money from the festival in those days, but it was great, and it was there was a lot of energy and enthusiasm about it, and people really liked it. So so bearing in mind the thing about not being motivated by money, what's not to like, really? It was enjoyable.
Yeah, what does motivate you?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. Well, I mean, putting on, I mean, one of the things that motivates me is putting on a really good festival, and I think there are lots and lots of examples of not very good festivals, I think. And I mean, I kind of know a bit about it because I've run a festival for nearly 3 decades, but also the other thing I did when I was very little was, well, teenagers, I went to a few festivals, not a lot, but a few. And I like the kind of energy and spontaneity of a festival, the apparent spontaneity. I like the opportunity to celebrate. I like people coming together for something. And I quite like the notion of a sort of credible contemporary festival. So, you know, I would even include, feel free to tell me this is not relevant, but I would include things like Christmas and Easter and Diwali and Bonfire Night and those kind of established festivals that happen, that most people in the UK would celebrate a lot of those. And I like what's the fizziness of those things. Why do we, you know, obviously Christmas is traditionally a religious festival, but these days loads of people celebrate Christmas who are not religious. So why is it? Why do we feel a need to come together? Why do we feel a need to celebrate and eat and drink and have a good time? And so I'm interested in that. I've got no further in my life other than just being vaguely interested in it. But so I like festivals, and what motivates me is putting on what I would think to be a really good festival that, and I think, you know, a question that people do ask me a lot is, why do I keep doing it? You know, 30 years is a long time to keep doing something. And I think it's because I always feel really proud of what we've achieved, but never really feel like we've done everything that I want. There's still new things for us to do. And, you know, perhaps like a lot of places, as the population and residents of Leicester change over time and emerge and grow, new people arrive, the demographic changes, you know, I want everybody to be involved in the comedy festival in one way, shape or form. Everybody laughs at something. And our job is to find as many of those things possible and to cram them into 19 days. It's often a phrase that I use, but I really mean it, really. So one of the main things that motivates me is putting on a really shit-hot festival.
That's a great motivation. I really like as well the idea of, you know, you kind of, everyone in your degree went off to the kind of hubs, but you decided to stick around and like build something new and build something that didn't exist before. Like, you know, people like to chase jobs, for example, but you kind of created a job for yourself. And I do think there is really something to be said for doing that in sort of like staking your claim in a location and saying, this is where we do things, and I'm not trying to like chase the London scene. I'm going to build the scene here. Because I've noticed when people do that is often when they kind of like, it is one way into kind of creating something that is sustainable and kind of that they're really invested in.
Yeah, yes, I completely agree with you, but there was never a conscious decision to do that. I mean, in hindsight, it's easy to kind of interpret it in that way. But, you know, I stayed in Leicester because certainly initially, when I moved to Leicester, rather than my parents spending a load of money on rent, they bought a house. And so I because they would have had to have paid for my rent if I'd paid to somebody else. So they bought a house and they rented it out to other students, and I lived in it.
Right.
So when I graduated, I had a house that I could stay in initially. So it was, as is often the case, I think, with people who do things like I do and have careers, there is quite often quite a dullish reason behind why they've ended up in a particular place and done what they've done. You know, they've met a partner, they've moved in, their partner earns a lot of money, so they're able to play and mess around for a bit. Or they've just coincidentally ended up somewhere and they've stepped on somebody's floor. And, you know, it's not, there wasn't, I do agree with you in terms of kind of, in hindsight, the interpretation of what happened.
Yeah.
But it was never my conscious decision
Sure.
to do that.
But that security that you point to is also really, like, as you say, like if you have a partner who makes a lot of money or that kind of thing, as often a way a lot of people start their kind of creative careers as well.
Sure.
I'm interested in so at what point then did you decide, okay, well, I guess this is kind of a going concern, and like, you know, what steps did you then take? So you were talking about the transition into like creating the charity, but you already had like a board of, like, I think you said directors and other people involved. So like, how did that side of it grow in the sort of business sense?
So we got away with it and messed around and made it up as we went along and had an amazing time for about 10 years, which, again, people are surprised by that. Years ago, one of my trustees in the charity was a senior manager at NatWest Bank, and he used to always just laugh when I'd say we messed around for 10, like, you know, we were running quite a big, reasonably successful comedy festival, you know, and we did it every February. We've done it every single February for 28 years now. You know, it sort of had a reasonable profile. Famous people came, we were mentioned in national press and all of that, but we were just making it up and we were having such a good time. So it took about 10 years and maybe 8 years, something like that. And then at about that time, most of my friends from university and most of my other friends were buying houses and settling down, and some were having kids and getting married. And I was very happy and having a great time, but I was still messing around in Leicester with this festival every year, and I had no money, but that didn't matter really. But I did want to buy a house. And so I stopped being the director of the festival for, I think it was for 3 years, maybe 4. And I went to work for a local council and ran a theatre venue for them. I was program and marketing manager. And so what did that mean? That meant that I got a secure income. It meant that I got paid every month, because in those days I wasn't getting paid every month by the festival, and I could get a mortgage because I was working for a local council. They're a reputable employer, and so that was fine. But I didn't want the festival to finish, so I became chair of the board, and we got a development grant from the Arts Council to appoint our very first festival manager. So we employed somebody who, I'm sure, took the job because they were expecting a salary at the end of every month, and you know, things to be a bit more organized than perhaps they had been. And that really made, if you'll excuse the vague pun, a big difference to what we were doing, because she, you know, she thought it was a proper job and a proper organization, you know, whereas I was kind of just messing around for a long time. And you know, it was a limited company, don't get me wrong, we were paying people and all that sort of thing, but it was never a business, it was never proper. And so she arrived and sort of treated it slightly differently to the way that I had, really. And I think that time away, although probably the council and my employers would say that I possibly spent more time messing around with the festival than I did doing at my actual paid job. That's not why I left after 3 years, by the way. It was quite good to have that distance, and it was quite good to have somebody else's perspective coming in, treating it like it was proper. It was it was a real organization with real staff and all that kind of stuff. And then after about 3 years or so, I slightly oddly had to apply for a job at the festival, due to some technical thing. So I applied for the job, and who knew, I got it. So I then gave up the job and then came back to the festival. And so that time away was really good. So that was probably, 11, 12 years into the festival. And then shortly after that happened, we sort of began to realize that this notion, I mean, in those days, the festival was 10 days long. Mm-hmm. So the idea of, you wanted me, I think, to sort of touch a bit on the business side of things, but the idea of running a 365-day a year business on 10 days activity. I mean, there's seasonality, and then there's just being stupid. Sure. And so people used to say, God, your business is really seasonal. And it's like, well, 10 days is like, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There's so many reasons why a business can't function like that. You lose staff all the time because you don't have the cash flow, because you don't have the income. So you're constantly recruiting new staff according to the peaks and troughs of the business. You can't generate income outside of that 10 days because your entire business is focused on 10 days. And so the idea of getting money in June, you wouldn't, because it's got to be in February. So there were all sorts of reasons why the business wasn't working. The festival happened, and the festival was successful, and people came to the festival. And I suppose maybe it's relevant to talk a bit about the model of the festival. So when we set it up, we were students, so we had no money, there was no investment, there was no sponsorship, there was nothing. So we knew that we couldn't take the risk on the entire festival program. So the model of festival, there's lots of different models of festivals, as you perhaps know, but broadly, we looked at two options. One is the organization at the center of the festival books all the venues, hires all the venues, books all the acts, sells all the tickets, and hopefully at the end of the day, there's more money from the tickets than there is from the costs, and the organization keeps the money and pays its staff. That's one model. There's loads of different models, but for the purposes of this conversation, the other model is more like the Edinburgh Fringe, for those people who know the Edinburgh Fringe, whereby the central organization books virtually nothing. All these people promote and produce and organize all the gigs, and they pay the Fringe for the benefit of being part of the Fringe. So when we were students, we had no money, we couldn't book all the venues and do all of that sort of stuff. So we adopted a kind of Fringe model, Edinburgh Fringe model, whereby we didn't take the risk on everything. And broadly, that model applies today. We do produce stuff during the festival ourselves, so we put on shows ourselves, and we're very supportive. I think the difference between the Fringe and us is that I think we curate the festival with our promoters and our venues and our performers, rather than the Fringe. They are famously very passive. If I wanted to go and do a show at the Fringe, I could. It wouldn't matter. Anybody can. That's kind of the point. Whereas with us, there's a bit more curating role for the team and the central organisation. So therefore, the festival was really successful, but we didn't earn any more money, because if loads of people came, the venues did really well and the acts did really well, but we didn't. Made no difference to us financially. So we had to look at all of that, because it wasn't sustainable. And it was at that point that we then started to look at what our skills and experience and expertise was. And we had a guy come and work with us, like a consultant, who kind of supported me. And I remember Pete used to keep saying to me, "What do you do? What's your business?" And I'd say, "Leicester Comedy Festival." And he'd go, no, Geoff, what is your business? And I go, Leicester Comedy Festival. And he'd go, no, what is it you actually do? And the answer I gave over and over again was Leicester Comedy Festival. And then it was almost a light bulb moment when I suddenly realized what he was talking about. And actually the answer, what do we do is we negotiate with artists, we organize events, we're quite good at publicity and marketing, we get sponsorship in, we talk to funders and we get funding. We're a registered charity. We know about community engagement and participation. We know about partnership working. All of these things are actually what we do. The comedy festival is just a manifestation of all of those things. And once I realized that, you can then use that skills and experience in your business to do other things. So we don't just have to do Leicester Comedy Festival. And then once we realized that, we started to do some other things. So for example, in those days, quite a considerable part of our income was local authorities and the National Health Service and others would commission us to do health promotion work, which recently has become quite sexy in terms of comedians doing things in terms of promoting whatever it is, diabetes, or, you know, for people to look after their health. But in those days, it wasn't very sexy at all. It was deeply unfashionable. But so when you're doing that kind of work, you know, when you're being commissioned by Hull City Council, which is in the northeast of England, to do a 2-month health promotion work with young people around teenage pregnancy and sexual health, rocking up and somebody saying, oh, who are you? And I go, I'm the director of Leicester Comedy Festival. They quite often would say, you're in the wrong meeting. We don't understand. So the organisation needed to be called something else. And the answer was calling it Big Difference. And that is a very long answer to your question, I think.
No, please. This is all about you talking. So walk away. Right. That is really interesting. I've been thinking a lot in the last few years about different ways artists, theatre companies, comedians, like whoever you are, thinking about that breakdown of like, well, what are all my different skills? Because when you are running a business like that, there are so many different things that you have to do.
Sure.
And that you can actually package them up in different ways and offer them to different audiences.
Yeah.
So how did you did they approach you? Were you going out and sort of pitching those kinds of organizations? Like, how did that work come about?
Yeah. So you're probably getting the hang of me by now. We've been talking for almost half an hour. None of this was strategic or thought about or anything. So I knew a bloke who worked at a venue in Leicester who, and the venue had been really involved in the comedy festival and was a kind of key part of the festival. And so Adam was really good at getting money out of places. And there was a thing called the Neighbourhood Renewal Fund, which was a government thing where it was about, of course, as the name suggests, renewing neighbourhoods and building social capital and all these things that, I knew nothing about any of this. I just wanted to run a comedy festival, right? That's very clear. So Adam came to me and said, I think we could apply for some money to do a men's health project using comedy. So using cartooning, animation and stand-up to talk to men about going to the doctor and to not be so stupid and shy and embarrassed about talking about various health issues. And I thought this sounded like a wonderful idea, because at the end of the day, it meant that we might get, I don't know what we got, £5,000, let's say, management fee, which would go into the pot to making Big Difference more sustainable. Yeah. So it was something not to do in February, but it seemed to make total sense to me. And who knew, but Adam did a funding application and we got the money to do this project in Leicester. So we worked with some young men, teenagers, we produced a film in the end around different health issues and stuff. And then that film, I think, went to every secondary school in the city. But the other thing we did was we commissioned and produced a stand-up comedy show with a real comedian who was a proper stand-up comedian, not an actor pretending to be a comedian, which has happened lots
Yes.
of times. And so we produced this show to essentially encourage men to go to the doctor and to think about their health. And it toured around Leicester, and it got a little bit of publicity, and people started to talk about it locally, really. And then other people started to notice it. So we got asked, mainly in the Midlands of England, Birmingham, Coventry, Warwick, those sorts of places, and we got asked to do it. And then I met somebody who worked for Unison Healthcare, which is the health bit of the trade union Unison.
Oh yeah.
And this is maybe more relevant than I thought 30 seconds ago. But she really liked what we did, and she wanted to talk about improving health and well-being. I mean, this was 15 years ago, when it feels now, talking about health and well-being, everybody's talking about health and well-being, right? But in those days it wasn't, particularly in my world, which was running a comedy festival. So Karen was instrumental in giving us some more money and saying we could use this. So we spent a while going around and doing conferences, and just speculatively, people would probably in those days either phone us up or fax us and say, we've heard you've got this show. And we would go to a conference and perform the show in front of, 1,000 people or something at this conference. And then somebody would contact us as a result of that and say, oh, I was at that event, could you do this event? And so we started to do that. And then as a result of that, we found that using comedy and humour was quite an effective way of communicating with people. So you're absolutely right. And in the last year or so, with the pandemic and all, I think it's been really useful to be able to talk to people, comedians, about diversifying their income streams. And, I mentioned at the beginning, we do this thing called the UK Kids Comedy Festival. I think there's a whole opportunity for comedians and others to do work in schools and community settings, and it doesn't need to be diluted. So I think a lot of people hear me say that and think, oh, he's talking about community arts or family fun days, or, it doesn't have to be that. It can be credible comedy or credible performance, just in a different setting. I mean, we've done shows in prisons, in cathedrals, in other faith buildings, in libraries, in schools, at conferences, and they've all generally worked, and they've all generally been credible. So, but how did it happen? Just by chance, really. And then other people started contacting us and saying, could you do, as I said earlier, could you do a project around young people and sexual health and teenage pregnancy? Yeah, I imagine we could.
Yeah.
And so what's relevant there, I think, which is I was going to say a second ago, is I think I've naturally always talked to people, and I've naturally always developed relationships with people. So, roll back the clock 30 years. I'm the director of a comedy festival, okay? Why would I talk to the Bishop of Leicester? Why would I talk to the Chief Constable? Why would I talk to somebody who's the head of Unison Healthcare, a trade union for people who work in the health profession? Why would all these people, why on earth would I talk to them? And other people who are involved in comedy and comedy festivals sometimes think I'm mad because I'm having these weird conversations. Surely you should just be speaking to comedians and venue managers all the time, right? You could probably talk to producers, probably talk to TV and radio and media people, but the bishop? But this is partly how I think, not I, but we have managed to sustain a festival for 3 decades, because all of these people give a toss about the festival and about what we do. And so again, in hindsight, we've managed to build a sustainable festival because a lot of people care about it and a lot of people think it's important. Not just comedians, audiences, venue managers and producers.
Yeah. And well, part of that is about like cultivating new audiences and new other customers effectively for
Yeah.
the different kinds of things that you do. And I think,
Absolutely.
you touched on this idea of like, oh, you have to sort of water things down, or it's a bit like uncool to do community, arts projects or whatever it is. But it's like those are where if you go into a school as a comedian, as a theatre company, as a musician or whatever, and bring them some kind of art, like you're building your audience, you're making it sustainable, right? You're investing in these children's appreciation of the arts. So I personally, I would like people to get over that kind of squeamishness, because like that's, you just have to, as you were talking, I was like, just networking, but not in that kind of sleazy way, just in the like, let's have a chat, let's find out what you need, let's talk about what I do, and you kind of, that's where the sort of the magic happens.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is cheesy, but I do kind of, I do think it's true. Leicester Comedy Festival, there's 3 words in that title. So it's got to be festive. What we do has to be festive. It's obviously it's a comedy festival, right? So the intention is always that it will raise a smile or make people laugh. Doesn't always do that, but that's the intention. And it's in Leicester. So, therefore, embedding what we do in the comedy community, nationally and internationally, is really important. Comedians, agents, managers involved in comedy need to care about what we do and think it's important. But also, if the people of Leicester don't notice it or don't care, if the chief constable doesn't like the festival, or say he likes the festival, then it ain't going to be sustainable. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier on when I was talking about sustaining and embedding a festival locally and being a good festival. Otherwise, it just pops up and disappears again, which lots of festivals do, and some of them are really good festivals. So anyway.
You mentioned at the start that part of what you did was like investing in like new talent and stuff like that. What does that look like for you guys?
Well, I think part of it with the festival is, is what I talked about before about kind of curating the festival. So I had one this morning actually, but we get loads of people contacting us and saying either I'm a new comedian, what do I do? Or I'd like to be a comedian, what do I do? And we've always kind of worked with those people, and we'll always reply to those sorts of emails and inquiries that we get. We're not a management company or an agent or a producer, but we can be supportive and point people in the right direction. If you want to become a dancer, there's loads of organizations that are funded to support you to being a dancer, and you can go to university, for goodness sake, to become a dancer. But I mean, and you can now go to university to become a stand-up comedian, but you couldn't for a long time. So we support those sorts of people kind of informally, and certainly with the festival, if you wanted to come and do a show at Leicester Comedy Festival, we would help you and we would point you in the right direction of, you don't want to do De Montfort Hall, which is 1,500 seats probably, and there are certain promoters and producers within the festival community who are probably better suited to working with you if you're a new comedian than somebody who's more established. That's just the way it works. So we kind of do that informally all the time. We also do some work and projects with children and young people who perhaps don't know that they want to become comedians, and don't know that they want to become new and emerging talent, but will do stand-up courses in schools and kind of improv classes and those kind of things. But I suppose most recently, how this has all manifested itself is we have a project called Circuit Breakers, which is a sort of, well, again, this isn't very cool, but I kind of describe it as a professional development opportunity for comedians. Well, comedians don't really, most of them, that's something that you don't do that. You do 5 minutes and then you do 10 and then you do 20, and that's your professional development. Then you go to Edinburgh. But circuit breakers is something we do with a few partners, and they get to meet the festival team, they get to meet other producers and promoters and managers, we do a professional photo shoot for them, and we do a crowdfunding thing to raise money for it, and sometimes it raises some and sometimes it raises less, but we do it anyway, because it's a good thing for the festival to be doing as a registered charity, I suppose. So lots of different ways that we support new talent. Most of it is quite informal, but Circuit Breakers has been going for 4 or 5 years now, I think. There's about 8 comedians each year that take part, and then some of them have gone on to be on national telly and done various things. So I think it came from the fact that comedians tell us it's quite a weird world, live comedy, and it's hard to navigate it. If you know people in it, it's fine, but if you don't, it's really confusing, and it's difficult to know at the start where to go and who to talk to, and all that kind of thing. So if we can use some of our experience and networks to help people, we will.
Demystify it a bit.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah. If someone were wanting to start a new festival from scratch, say, if your university undergraduate self were, wanting to start something like this, how would it be different now, or would it be different?
Well, there's a thing called the internet, which will make it a lot easier, I imagine, because we didn't have that in 1993 and 94, which makes me feel like I'm a bit of a grandfather, but it's true, we didn't. So we went to the library and looked in directories which had agents' numbers in them and things like that. There's a thing called the White Book, which was literally a directory of people that are involved in entertainment. But I think, and it's not the question that I thought you were going to ask me. What I thought you were going to ask me is, what would you do differently if you did it again? But you haven't asked me that question. You've asked me what would be different. I think what is really important now is to have a relationship and to communicate with your audience, which I think in 93, 94 was less of an obvious thing. We I said earlier on, we just wanted to put on Leicester Comedy Festival. It was never, we never thought about it as a long-term thing. For years and years, probably 20 years, we didn't have a box office, a centralized box office, which was a mistake. I wish we'd had one earlier, but the technology was just not there. It wasn't an option. So it wasn't, I didn't want one. It's that we just couldn't it couldn't work. Whereas it does now. And I think what I mean by that is communication and a relationship with your audience, not just the general public, but our audience, because we don't directly benefit from ticket sales. I was talking earlier on about the relationship in terms of that. Of course, we need a relationship with the audience, with the public that come to shows and buy tickets, but we also need to have a relationship with comedians and promoters and venues and producers, because they are the ones essentially that pay part of our generate part of the income that's needed for the festival, as well as sponsors and funders and other people. So all of that picture in terms of the market and in terms of our business audience, we had a really weird relationship with them in the early days, largely because of technology. We couldn't, I remember programming numbers into a fax machine and being very excited when we had a fax machine which you could send one piece of paper and send it to 20 people and that was amazing. But we found that really difficult, having a relationship and communicating with our larger audience. And now, because of social media and all that, it's so important. So that would be different, I think. And I think in the last 12 months, one of the things that's uppermost in my mind is digital content and online content. And, our festival is a live festival. It's absolutely a live festival. It's not a TV festival. It's not about producing content for other people. It's a live festival. You sit in a room and you watch a show for however long. That's what you do. But I am really conscious of this whole online digital thing that's obviously massively kicked in over the last 12 months with COVID. But so that's very different, and I think will increasingly be different. So there you are. That's two answers. But that's a really good question. I don't know what else would be different.
Is there, for example, like, is there are there more competition from other comedy festivals, for example, or?
Oh, yeah. Well, so what would I say to somebody wanting to try and set up a comedy festival? Certainly one in the UK is don't do it. We don't need any more competition from other people setting up comedy festivals, slightly flippantly. But I don't really think, again, this probably sounds really arrogant, but I don't really think there is much competition for us in terms of other comedy festivals. I think the more opportunities there are for comedians to earn money and to do what they do, and for us to celebrate comedy is a good thing, I think, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think, and I partly say this because we have been going for such a long time. We're the longest running comedy festival in Europe. I don't think other comedy festivals have popped up over the years and have disappeared, and it's kind of all right, really. I mean, I remember when there's been a few comedy festivals that have popped up in cities near us, and when I hear about it, there's a little bit of me that goes, but I think we're sort of in a bit of a fortunate position where we are seen as being, I don't know, maybe not the elder statesman of comedy, but we've been doing it for such a long time. We're pretty established. I do think we need to think about how young people engage with the festival and how they spend their time stuck to their, to screens, which is a bit of a stereotype. But I think we need to think about how people are going to spend their money in the future, and not just young people, but people in general. And we need to think about what the high street is going to look like and what city centres are going to look like, because we are predominantly a city centre festival. So I think in terms of competition, not so much with comedy festivals, I don't think, but probably with other leisure or things.
Other stuff to do.
Yeah.
To spend money, for sure. And I suppose also, like, the more people kind of are wanting to create comedy festivals or fringe festivals or whatever it is, you could look at it as, oh, there's more competition, but you could also look at it as there is a bigger market for comedy, there is a greater appetite for comedy. Like you were saying, sort of comedians being on NME, and it's like, oh, what is this kind of, almost a fairly new art form, really. Now it's super established. So, if, like, you can always look at it in a sort of a slightly more positive way as well. Like, not like, oh, I'm muscling in on my turf, but cool. There's more, as you say, more opportunities for comedians to make some money and to cultivate new audiences in different parts of the country and stuff like that. It's very different in Australia, where I'm from, where it's all very, like, heavily clustered around the major cities, and, like, you can't really have, like, a touring circuit because of all the distances. Like, there's a little bit of that, but
sure. I mean, one thing linked to everything that I've just said, I think, is one of the main things that is different now is also the rapid demise of traditional media. So, to give you a very simple example, when we set up the festival, our local daily newspaper is called the Leicester Mercury. Getting something in the Leicester Mercury was really important, because they used to sell 140,000 copies of the paper of a city that was 300,000 population, so almost half the people bought a copy of the paper. Well, now they sell, I don't know, 20,000, maybe even less. copies of the paper, and people consume stuff differently. So radio stations, in of themselves are in decline because people listen to podcasts and consume audio content in different ways. So that is very different now. Is getting something in the Leicester Mercury and on our local BBC radio station is not the way to reach loads of people, and so that's hard, because one of my ambitions for the festival is that everybody in Leicester and Leicestershire knows that it's on. They don't have to come, they need to know that it's on. And that's increasingly difficult because as communities diversify, so if we've got a significant Somalian population in Leicester, for example, I imagine most of them don't buy the Leicester Mercury or listen to the local BBC radio station. So how do you reach those people? And then you multiply that across the diverse communities of the city. It's really difficult. So getting a lot of interaction on Twitter is good, but you're only reaching a fraction of the people that you perhaps need to. So anyway, so media is different. That's one.
Yeah, definitely an ongoing challenge that I'm sure like everyone is grappling with on sort of a different scale. So you just mentioned that was one of your goals for the festival. What are your other goals?
Increasingly, one of my goals is to keep it going. And I know that's not very sexy. For a long time, people would say to me, do you want to rival the Edinburgh Fringe? And it's like, no, there's no. Edinburgh Fringe is an arts festival. It's a multi-platform thing. It's in a city in Scotland. It's entirely different to what we do. I don't want to rival the Edinburgh Fringe. But what I do want to do is keep the thing going, and because I think it's really good, and I think other people think it's really good as well, and it has a big impact locally, and I think nationally, particularly over the last year, comedians have said how important Leicester Comedy Festival is, which is lovely. So figuring out a way to keep it going is really important. But in terms of, we sort of have three goals, I think. One is for everybody locally to know it happens. The other one is to support new and emerging talent, which we've talked about. And the other one is to celebrate British comedy. That we do various competitions. We also give an award every year to a legend of comedy, which we've given to various comedians over the years. We do Q&As with like this, but with comedians, where I get to interview comedians, kind of well-known, famous comedians who talk about their comedy careers. And I think, I think you said a few minutes ago that comedy is now an established thing. I think it is, but it's still, if you like modern comedy, contemporary, not like Jim Davidson and Bernard Manning and all that, which might mean nothing to you, I don't know, but old school comedians, obviously being comedians, Morecambe and Wise, the two Ronnies, Monty Python, there's a long tradition. But if we're talking about modern comedy, it's still pretty new, and I think I want to kind of celebrate that, because I think those festivals, it goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning in terms of festivals being important to bring people together, and I think comedy and humour is a really important thing, so celebrating that and kind of validating it and saying it's important, it's as important as dance or theatre or is something that we try and do with the festival.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's why I've included comedians in this under the umbrella of artists in the title of this podcast, right? Because I also agree. I think it is an art, and it's an art form, particularly in this country, that's really like integral. So great. I think that's such a great goal to have and to continue to have. So I think, and the perfect kind of moment to wrap up our interview. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me
to hear about the history of the festival, and I look forward to seeing it be able to return in all of its live glory, hopefully next February.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
It's been nice talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Artists Make Money. You can find us on Instagram at Artists Make Money, where you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter. You can find me on Twitter at vivegan41, and you'll find Geoff on Twitter at Geoff_Rowe, and on Instagram at Geoff_Rowe, BEM. We will link those in the show notes. You can follow the Leicester Comedy Festival, Kids Comedy Festival, and Big Difference Company on Twitter. All the handles for those are also in the show notes. The music for this podcast is composed by Tiiva, and you can find them at Tiiva Music. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you would give us a follow, leave us a review, share it with a friend. It really helps new people to get involved and spread the word. Being an artist is hard, and making a living from it is even harder, but I believe in you. Keep going.